Doom: The Dark Ages has been out for about 2 months now, and I still feel people are going about this game the wrong way. Doom: The Dark Ages and Doom Eternal are really one of a kind, doing things in the first-person genre that I've never seen before. As should be expected, people didn't really figure out the secret sauce of the game at first, but did eventually. People eventually fell into the Doom Eternal quick-swap high mobility meta. But for the Dark Ages, it seems people really haven't figured things out yet. The Dark Ages is rather similar to another game, that being Team Fortress 2. Hell, they even have golden weapons and golden armor? I mean, some weapons turn into Australium, I guess. In TF2, it's not just the weapons that are important, it's the loadout. Each weapon fulfills a role that rounds you out, even if the weapon by itself is bad. Look no further than the bootlegger. These are shoes for the demo man, which replace your main weapon. In a vacuum, this is the worst primary weapon a demo man can have, but it's a mainstay in the Demo Knight loadout. The Dark Ages doesn't want you to swap between weapons in your pocket, but to build a kit of all weapons in your hands right now and how they bounce off of each other. The weapons in your hands are the shield, rune, gun, and melee. People are saying that there's only one way to play in Dark Ages. Your kit dictates how you play. Change your kit and you have to change your style of play. Sure, on lower difficulties it doesn't matter since all the demons melt the same, but on higher difficulties, you need to take advantage of what your kit provides. Even if you have the same weapon, switching what it's paired up with changes the playstyle, and I'm going to go over some builds I found in the Dark Ages. Something to note is that the videos demonstrating the builds are all tested in the hardest arena of the game. And the damage values have all been set to 500/50, meaning that I take 500% damage and can get 3 or even 2 shot by certain attacks, and demons take 50% damage. Meet the build that got me through my Ultra Nightmare playthrough on the first try. I call it the Hole Puncher. Your primary weapon will be the Ricochet Shredder. The Ricochet deals more damage than the standard Shredder, and auto-locks onto nearby enemies, even invisible ones. If there are multiple, they cycle through them. This lets you attack groups of enemies from safe angles without exposing yourself to fire. If you find yourself surrounded by enemies, and especially if the boss is surrounded by enemies, use this to even the odds. Saw stun an enemy, then shoot it to ricochet your bullets into other enemies. What happens if you come across a single target that can't be saw stunned? Your backup is your Power Gauntlet. The Power Gauntlet has the single highest DPS in the game. The first 2 punches don't do much, but punch 3 and 4 do slightly less than half of the damage of the Dread Mace, and a single Health Surge parry gives you back 2 melee charges. If the boss cannot be shield stunned or is not surrounded by enemies, get in close and use your Power Gauntlets to punch them to death. The rune equipped is the Ground Fissure. While the Shredder and Power Gauntlet are okay at armor, they don't excel at it. The Ground Fissure rune heats armor up easily so it can be shattered by the shield.
Major organ located.
You know, back when I played TF2, I mained the Pyro, and this build really brings me back to my Pyro days, hence why I like to call this the WM1 build. Time to bring back the Power Gauntlet. Whereas with the Hole Puncher build, the gun was the primary and my melee was the secondary. For the WM1 build, my melee is the primary, taking full advantage of the DPS. But the Power Gauntlets have a few issues. You need Hell Surges to power them, and if you only have 2 charges, there's no point in using them until you can get more Hell Surges, and there are not enough Hell Surges to punch every fodder. So you pair it up with the Pulverizer. The Pulverizer will melt all fodder in front of you. Use the speed boost to catch Hell Surges. Don't just deflect the ones posing a danger to you. Catch even the ones that will miss you. Hell Surges feed the Gauntlet. The Gauntlet feeds the Pulverizer, and the Pulverizer gets more Hell Surges. Plus, its DPS is still pretty good. Use it as a finisher on enemies when you don't have enough melee charges. Or perform drive-by shootings. That arc lets you damage just about everybody on the screen at the same time. Once again, I use the Ground Fissure. The Pulverizer is okay at armor hitting, but it still isn't as good as the Ground Fissure.
Major organ located.
You know, back in the old days when they practiced lobotomy, they put an ice pick into your eye, then use a hammer to shove it into your brain. We're doing something similar here. The lobotomy build is one that I see a lot of people run. Your primary weapon is the Impaler with the lobotomy feature. And your backup, or should I say your super, is the Dread Mace. It has the second highest burst damage in the game, second to only the BFC. You're going to use the Impaler to charge up your Dread Mace, then drop the Dread Mace on the strongest enemy you can find. Unfortunately, this build doesn't do well with fodder clearing, so we're going to pair it up with the Holy Swarm rune to clear out fodder for us. You don't want to pair this up with Heaven Splitter because you want the Hell Searches to charge up your Dread Mace.
Major organ located.
I call this shock and awe. Unfortunately, the Cycler doesn't have much going on in the DPS department, at least on low charge. Kill low level enemies to build up that charge, then turn it on higher level enemies. The electric arc helps since that bolt stuns and lets the Cycler do bonus damage. The plasma weapons have bad armor damage, so I'm pairing this up with the flail for armor cracking, and topping it off with the Heaven Splitter rune, which stuns enemies and applies shock. Reminder that the Cycler does bonus damage to shocked enemies, and it helps that they sorta stand still while being stunned.
Major organ located.
Meet the Energizer Bunny, cause it keeps going. You can also call this the Void Ray build. If you play StarCraft 2, you know Void Rays deal single target damage that increases over time. So it was common to try to build charge before going into battle, then keeping that charge for as long as possible. The Accelerator has the second best DPS in the game, second to only the Power Gauntlet. For this one, I'm going with the Modulator and Heat Cell because I intend to capitalize on the raw DPS. Once again paired up with the Flail because it lacks armor cracking abilities. And this time I'm using the Auto Turret as my rune. Needs more experimentation, but it seems like the Auto Turret has the high single target damage of all the runes. The high rate of fire means I can clear fodder easily, and I just need to focus fire on the big guys.
Major organ located.
Whereas the other builds are close and medium range builds, the Sound of Thunder is a long range build. Those grenades are powerful, but they also do splash damage to you. The cluster grenades aren't just for auto clearing, they can deal bonus damage to the original target. Your goal here is to stay at range while using the grenade launcher to attack at odd angles. Your melee will be the Dread Mace. Since you shouldn't be spending much time up close, use the Dread Mace on anything that closes the gap. And for this, we're pairing it up with the Holy Swarm, which will capitalize on the idea of attacking enemies at range and odd angles.
Major organ located.
Honestly, I have no idea what to call this build, but Southern Justice seems fine to me. The Super Shotgun is arguably the most iconic Doom weapon, second to maybe the BFG. The thing has good armor damage and burst damage, but lacks raw DPS. So get in close, use the shotgun to destroy armor before letting your fist dispense some good old-fashioned street justice. Reminder that all the damage comes from punch 3 and 4. So if a round of punches doesn't do the job, then use the Super Shotty as a coup de grace. Use the Holy Sword to make up for its lack of fodder clearing.
Major organ located.
The Gladiator build is where even your gun is a type of melee. The chain shot does decent burst damage and good armor cracking, so I paired it up with the Dread Mace, which may confuse you since you'd think I'd want the Power Gauntlet for raw DPS, but the chain shot gets charged for every Hell parry, just like the gauntlets, so the two would compete. Like the grenade launcher, you want to try and stay at range, but unlike the grenade launcher, you aren't punished if you close the gap. If you're worried about fodder clearing, pair it up with Holy Swarm.
Major organ located.
Anyone remember the Brass Beast from TF2? I haven't played in a long time, but back then, it was hated, the movement speed being too detrimental for the damage increase. But we can make it work in the Dark Ages. I call this the Skull Beast. Our primary weapon is the Ravager, the minigun of the game, and I'm equipping it with the slow burn upgrade to get higher rate of fire and thus higher DPS. I've seen some people say that the slow movement isn't a problem. Not on these damage settings where even the fodder can clean you up. They're pairing this up with the Dread Mace and Heaven Splitter. This is perhaps one of the more unique styles of play, as instead of charging, we're going to be playing rather passively. You're playing the range game, trying to catch Hell Surges until you can stun an enemy with either Lightning or Falter, then burst them down. Dread Mace if it's available, but if not, Ravage them. You can use the Shield Stun to prolong the stun state. You want them to stay there and take it. Once the stun state wears off, stop shooting and go back to playing catch.
Major organ located.